In a world where reality and the unexplainable collide, one case stands out as the pinnacle of both curiosity and horror: the trial of the devil. This isn't just folklore, it's a chilling chapter in legal history. We'll unravel the unsettling events that led to Satan himself being put on trial. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Criminal Chronicles. Today we're talking about the Devil Made Me Do It trial of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. This was one of the rarest legal proceedings where the very embodiment of evil was called to answer before the law. In 1969, the Glatzel family settled in Brookfield, Connecticut, residing in a single-story ranch house not far from Route 7. Judy and Carl Glatzel were parents to 4 children: 26-year-old Debbie, the only daughter, 14-year-old Carl Jr., 13-year-old Alan, and the youngest, 11-year-old David. While all the children stayed with their parents, Debbie lived separately in Bridgeport with a single mother, Mary Johnson. Mary Johnson had 3 children of her own. In 1971, she was diagnosed with a form of colon cancer. Unable to work as much, Mary began taking in people to rent rooms in her apartment to help pay the bills. In 1976, Debbie Glatzel, who worked as a dog groomer, moved in. Debbie would become very close to the Johnson family, going the extra mile to assist with money matters and to care for the younger kids. Her generosity led Mary Johnson's eldest son, Arne, to fall in love with Debbie. During the 4 years that they lived together, Debbie and Arne grew very close, and by 1981 they were engaged and had plans to get married. The happy couple was intent on getting out of Bridgeport, and they began to look for a house that was big enough to accommodate themselves, as well as Arne's mother, her 2 daughters, and the niece she'd been raising since the little girl was a baby. They wanted a place that was close enough for Debbie to commute to her job in Newtown, and in April of 1980, they saw a listing in the Bridgeport Post for a house available to rent in Newtown. The house was located in a rural setting, and the owner had told them it would be ready in July for them to move into, because Arne's mother was getting sicker from her cancer. Arne and Debbie had decided that they would handle the house expenses. Mary and the kids will live in the main house while Arne and Debbie will occupy the in-law apartment. Arne Johnson was a young man who was known to be quiet, steady-tempered, well-mannered, and extremely compassionate, with a great sense of responsibility for those he loved and cared about. On July the 2nd, Debbie and Arne reached the Newtown house early with moving boxes. By 1 p.m., Debbie's mom, Judy, came with lunch and her 3 young kids. The children explored, especially intrigued by a back bedroom with a large waterbed left by a previous tenant. They played boisterously on the bed until they were called to help with the boxes. All left the room, except for David, who stayed back. David would later claim that as he stood at the foot of the waterbed looking out of the window, he felt 2 hands suddenly and forcefully push him down onto the bed. He landed on his back on the waterbed, and when he looked up to see who had pushed him, he found himself face to face with the figure of an old man who had a menacing look on his face. But the most terrifying thing about this man, the statue David claimed was transparent. According to David, the man slowly lifted his arm and pointed at him, saying one word, "Beware," before vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. David refused to enter that room again after that, although he didn't tell anyone what he had witnessed at the time. But later that afternoon, his brothers Carl, Jr., and Alan were sent back into the bedroom to grab some boxes, and they would later report that something had happened to them as well. When they tried to leave the room, the door suddenly slammed shut, and no matter how much they pulled on and turned the doorknob, it would not open, and their shouts and banging brought no one to their aid. The door eventually opened after the 2 boys had pounded on it for a couple of minutes, but they didn't want to have anything to do with the room anymore. For the rest of the afternoon, it was reported that David Glatzel was grumpy, and he kept to himself. He refused to eat dinner, he wouldn't talk to anyone, and he retreated to the solitude of his room hours before bedtime. Later that night, while he was in bed, he whispered to his brother Alan, who shared a room with him, and he confessed what had happened earlier. David said there was something wrong with that house in Newtown and claimed that for some reason he could still see the entity that had appeared to him, even though he was tucked into his own bed miles away. The house had not been ready to move into that day, so Arne and Debbie had returned home with the Glatzel to spend the night. But now Alan told David that he should probably let his sister and her fiancé know what he was seeing at their rented house, because they were planning to move in the next day. David told Arne and Debbie about the old man and his warning. They tried to get into contact with Arne's mother, Mary Johnson, but it appeared by the time they called, she'd already started the trip from Bridgeton. Arne's mother arrived with the children at the house. Debbie and Arne decided to tell her that they wouldn't move into the house, but Arne's mother insisted she was going to stay with her younger kids. So Debbie and Arne drove to the Glatzel house. and once there, Judy Glatzel told them that things were kind of strange. Carl Jr., David's older brother, he was acting very rude and angry. He'd been yelling at everyone all day, especially David, who he was calling names, saying like, "You're crazy, you're seeing ghosts," just using language that he would not normally use. Being aggressive, David would wake up from nightmares describing what he had seen in them. He says he would see a man with big black eyes, a thin face, jagged teeth, pointed ears, and hooves. He called this creature the Beast Man. David would say that the Beast Man would tell him to beware. Things took a turn for the worse when he began seeing the Beast Man during the day. He said this monster would appear to him as an old man with a white beard and would be dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans. Even though this monster wasn't looking like anything David had seen in his dreams or nightmares, he knew this was the Beast Man. The family decided to seek the help of their church. A priest, Father Dennis, was invited to the family home, where he sprinkled some holy water and blessed the house. Now the blessing seemed to work, short term at least. Everyone slept peacefully that night with no interruptions, except for Arne Johnson, who later told his fiancée Debbie that he had not slept a wink due to the distinct feeling that there was something in the room with them. Standing at his bedside watching him all night, the Glatzels would have their hopes crushed that Father Dennis had taken care of the problem. When the following night the supernatural events started back up with a fervor, the sounds coming from the Arctic became louder, and David's dreams and visions became even more terrifying. At this point, David began hissing at his family and would speak in multiple voices. He was seeing more and more figures crawling out of hell to torture him. The following morning, Judy called Father Dennis again and told him things had gotten worse. They needed help. He promised to contact the Bridgeport Diocese, but in the meantime, Father Dennis suggested that Judy get into contact with Ed and Lorraine Warren, who he described as psychic investigators. By 1980, Ed and Lorraine had already made quite the name for themselves. Ed Warren claims to have grown up in a house that was haunted. He served in the U.S. Navy during World War II before pursuing a career as a paranormal investigator. Lorraine Warren was 16 years old when she met Ed, and she'd also been born in Bridgeport. Lorraine claimed to have been able to see and communicate with spirits from the time that she was a young girl, and she would become instrumental in paranormal investigations because, allegedly, she was able to use her psychic abilities. Lorraine was also a lifelong devout Catholic, and she felt that her faith in God was essential to their work, especially when dealing with demonic entities. The couple founded the New England Society for Psychic Research in 1952. They were sometimes asked to assist in police investigations that involved satanic ritualistic murder, and they were also consulted by the Catholic Church in matters of hauntings and possessions. Multiple times they have also been present at many church-sanctioned exorcisms. The Warrens had worked with Father Dennis from St. Joseph's in the past. He trusted them, and he felt that they might be able to provide some help to the Glatzel family, while he investigated and began the long process of getting the diocese involved in what was happening with David Glatzel. On July 14th, the Warrens went to the Glatzel house for the first time, bringing along a friend of theirs who was also a medical doctor. When the Warrens spoke to David, they found what he was saying to be believable. He spoke with confidence. His story stayed consistently the same, even the small details, and he didn't change anything based on questions he was asked or information given to him. By the end of the first week of August 1980, things with David Glatzel had become so bad that 2 priests from St. Joseph's had gone to the bishop and requested an exorcism. On August 11th, the Warrens gave the priests evidence of David Glatzel being possessed in the form of tape recordings and photographs along with their letter of support, saying they believed a supernatural phenomenon was occurring in the Glatzel home. The Bridgeport Diocese assigned Father Francis Vergleich to the case. He was well researched on the subject of demonology, and he had already met with Debbie, her mother Judy, and her fiancé Arne Johnson. On August 17th, Father Francis with the Warrens at the Glatzel came up with an exorcism plan. The Warrens felt that they were dealing with a case of demonic possession and suggested a major exorcism, but Father Francis felt it would be better if they started with a minor exorcism, with plans to move forward with a major one if he felt it was necessary. On August 20th, 1980 at 3 p.m., it was conducted by Father Francis and 2 other priests. In the aftermath, it seemed like the ritual had been successful. 3 minor exorcisms were performed. Lorraine Warren claimed it felt as if the heavy atmosphere had been lifted, and they could all feel a difference. She said she was able to tell the priest that there were no longer any spirits in the house, but this did not mean that they had been expelled permanently, only that they had withdrawn for the moment. For several days, the Glatzels enjoyed the peace of a demon-free home, and apparently, they've been successful in expelling the spirits from David's body, but they hadn't left the area as David claimed he could still see them and feel them around him, and they were no longer focused only on David, but whoever was in the vicinity. August 25th, that peace was shattered. The entity was back and angrier than ever, and that anger seemed to be directed toward Arne Cheyenne Johnson, whom the demon threatened to kill. One night, Arne prevented David from stabbing his brother Alan with a knife, and according to the Glatzel family, David turned on Arne and screamed that he would possess him for interfering. During one of these exorcisms, Arne Johnson had challenged a demon. He told the demon to take him on and leave his buddy David alone. On October 14th, Arne's mother, Mary Johnson, took her 3 girls out of the rented Newtown house. After the children fell victim to accident after accident, Mary reported that they had all been seeing, hearing, and feeling odd and scary things, but they were also turning on each other, their behavior becoming argumentative and aggressive. At the end of November, Arne and Debbie left the Glatzel home when Debbie got a new dog grooming job at the Brookfield Kennel on Route 7, managed by Alan Bono. The business was owned by his sister, but Bono didn't know anything about running a kennel. He didn't even like animals, so he was quick to offer Debbie Glatzel the job, which came along with a free apartment in a block of 4 units that he also managed right next to the kennel. Things seemed to be looking up for the young people who now had 2 steady incomes and a place of their own, and they really liked Alan Bono, who had his issues, but he was friendly with them. Alan was a very heavy drinker and alcoholic. Alan Bono liked to regale his new tenants with stories about himself, the places he had seen and the things he had done. According to the Glatzel, between November and January, Arne was possessed several more times, during which he was a completely different person, filled with rage, even punching a hole through the wall one time. By February 15th, Arne and Debbie picked up Arne's 2 sisters and his cousin from Bridgeport, where Mary Johnson and the girls were now living. Arne's sisters were 15-year-old Wanda, 13-year-old Janice, and his cousin, 9-year-old Mary. The children did not have school the next day, so they were planning to spend the night with Arne and Debbie. The next morning, February 15th, Arne woke up as usual to go to his job as a landscaper at Wright Tree Services, but that morning he felt ill. His head was pounding, his stomach felt queasy, his throat was sore, and he had a rattling cough, so he called in sick to work. He slept for a few hours while Debbie brought the girls to the kennel with her, so they could watch her work and play with the dogs. Arne woke up a little bit after 10, feeling somewhat run down but good enough to move around, and he walked over to the kennels to join the girls as they watched Debbie groom a black poodle. At some point, Alan Bono joined their little group, and according to Debbie, he was already drunk by 11:20 a.m. When Debbie finished working on the poodle, Alan invited them all out for lunch at a nearby bar called Mug and Munch. Debbie recounted that everyone had hamburgers and Cokes, but Alan excessively drank wine. Bono urged Arne and Debbie to join him for a drink. Initially hesitant, they eventually accepted a glass of wine each. Later, at a pet store, an unusual event occurred. A large parrot landed and stayed on Arne's shoulder the entire time they shopped. Once back at the kennels, Arne repaired Alan Bono's stereo, which hadn't been working, and after it was fixed, he went to lie down for a bit because he was still not feeling good, while Alan Bono kept drinking. At around 6 in the evening, Alan invited everyone to his apartment above the kennels. He turned on the TV, but the bad signal made him angry. He hit his hand and punched the wall. Debbie felt he was upset, so she told the girls to leave. When they were outside, Alan grabbed Mary's arm and didn't let go. Arne told him to stop, but he didn't listen. Wanda heard Arne make a strange noise and tried to move him, but he was very still, like a rock. Debbie Glatzel tried to intervene between Arne and Alan when Wanda saw something shiny fly. Moments later, Arne walked towards the woods, as if in a trance, while Alan lay motionless with a bloodied 5-inch knife nearby that Arne usually carried. Detective John Lucas stated that upon their arrival at the Brookfield Kennels, they found 4 people, including Arne's 2 sisters, his cousin, and Debbie Glatzel, surrounding Alan's body. Officers found Alan Bono with a weak pulse, and although an ambulance arrived by 7:00 p.m., he was declared dead at Danbury Hospital by 7:39 p.m. Around the same time, Arne Johnson was located walking near Silverman Road. He remained silent about the incident and was arrested and charged with murder, with bail set at $125,000. The police considered various motives: a disagreement stemming from Alan Bono's interaction with Mary, Arne's cousin, a possible dispute over stereo repair payment, and a speculated love triangle, as Arne and Debbie had grown notably close to Bono, while even discussing opening a business together. The police would later say that in the 3 weeks after Alan Bono's murder, they conducted 18 in-depth interviews. Some of those interviews were the 4 people who had witnessed the crime, who were interviewed separately, and at the time, their stories all lined up. It was later discovered that Debbie had not met Arne for the first time when she moved in with his mother. Debbie had in fact met Arne in 1974 when she was 19 and he was 12. Apparently, Debbie had knocked over a magazine display at the supermarket, and Arne, who was there with his mother, walked over and helped her get everything picked up. Then Debbie made friends with Mary Johnson, and later she moved in with them. On February 27, 1981, the Hartford Courant reported that the Bridgeport Diocese had assigned Father Francis Vergelak to investigate the possibility of diabolical possession in David Glatzel. According to Nicholas Grecol, Director of Communications for the diocese, Grecol also said that this was the first time in his knowledge that the diocese has assigned an investigator to such a case. The media tried to reach Vergelak for comment, but he was out of the country at the time and he had not yet reported the findings of his investigation to the diocese. The diocese admitted to having performed an exorcism, but they said that they only did like one or two, and they weren't formal ones. Grecol claims that a formal or solemn exorcism was never even requested, even though the Warrens and the Glatzels insist that they had asked for a formal exorcism. Ed and Lorraine Warren were also interviewed. They told the press that they do not believe Arne was possessed any longer, but he could be taken over again at any time. And Lorraine said, the demon used Arne to achieve its goal. It wanted to really destroy this young man's life. The Warren, along with the Glatzel family, disagreed with the diocese about whether or not a formal exorcism had been requested. Lorraine said a few things had made it possible for the demon to fully take over Arne. First thing was, he had taken penicillin the day he wasn't feeling well, which is an antibiotic, and Arne had also had some alcohol that afternoon, which further weakened his demon defenses. Arne's court-appointed attorney George Thim was also not available for comment, but by early March, Arne had a new lawyer, Martin Manila, 6 years out of law school and hungry to make a name for himself. According to Mary Johnson, Arne's mother, Manila had offered to represent her son free of charge, and as soon as he was on the case, he announced to the media that if his client was indicted, he was prepared to make a legal argument that the devil had made Arne Johnson murder Alan Bono. Manila had said, the courts have dealt with the existence of God, now they're going to have to deal with the existence of the devil. This case will be unique in the higher jurisdiction system. We have substantial credible evidence that Mr. Johnson had no intent to harm anyone, and what happened was the result of demonic possession. People may not really want to deal with the devil, but he exists. But when Martin Manella said he had credible evidence that Arne Johnson was possessed, he was referring to the over 150 photos that showed David Glatzel in various stages of possession. These photos showed David clutching at his throat while his father and older brother restrained him, and another photo showed Arne Johnson holding a silver crucifix to David's forehead. Tape recordings had also been made, which one had the sounds of heavy breathing, followed by David making guttural sounds and uttering obscenities. Martin Manila claimed he had Catholic priests and ghost hunters ready to testify, and he said, if witnesses swear on the Bible, it means the courts accepted the existence of God. It follows that they would also accept the existence of the devil. On March 19, 1981, Arne Johnson was indicted by an 18-member grand jury in the Danbury Superior Court, and State Attorney Walter Flanagan said he considered the murder a simple case of homicide that occurred during a heated argument. By May's end, Debbie, Judy, and the Warrens told the papers claiming that Arne was possessed and controlled by the devil or a demon beyond the shadow of doubt. They all said that Arne's mistake had been challenging the thing in seat of David. The Warrens also talked about their close relationship with Father Vergelak and many other local priests, but the Bridgeport Diocese had taken a stance of silence, and their priests involved weren't allowed to talk to reporters. In April, Arne's lawyers looked at Bono's clothes and some samples since Bono was turned to ashes. One lawyer, Paul, thought these items might show signs of a demon's role in the murder. He said if Bono's clothes didn't have blood or cuts, it could mean a demon was involved, along with the absence of rips and stab wounds. The judge letting them check these things suggested the court might listen to a demon made him do it defense, which hadn't been used in the US before. In October, after months of talking about how he would make Arne Johnson's murder trial the first American court case to test the existence of the devil, Martin Manila was stunned when Judge Robert Callaghan ruled that the demonic possession defense could not be used in court. On November 5th, the trial of 19-year-old Arne Cheyenne Johnson, the trial which would become known as The Devil Made Me Do It, took place at Connecticut Superior Court in Danbury. 12 jurors were seated, and Judge Callahan once again informed the gathering crowd that he would not be allowing a defense based on demonic possession, period. So they switched to a defense case instead. During closing arguments, the state's attorney, Walter Flanagan, told the jury that Arne intended to kill Alan Bono. And even though the prosecution did not need to present a motive, he said it had probably been due to jealousy over Debbie, and the number of times that Alan had been stabbed proved Arne's intent. Martin Manila said that if Alan Bono had not grabbed Mary and threatened her, he would still be alive. On November 24th, the jury began to deliberate, and after 6 hours, the 7 women and 5 men were unable to reach a verdict. Being stuck on the conflicting witness statements the next afternoon, they were deadlocked again until later that day when the jury returned with a verdict, and Arne Cheyenne Johnson was convicted on the reduced charge of first-degree manslaughter. On December 18th, Arne was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. He would only end up serving 5 because while he had been locked up, Arne had been an exemplary prisoner who never gave anyone trouble and who didn't have any altercations or issues with prison staff or fellow prisoners. So while behind bars, Arne married Debbie Glatzel, and after he was released, they would have 2 children together. Now, although David Glatzel, the possessed 11-year-old, has removed himself from the public eye, his brother Carl has spoken to the media claiming that his brother is doing well and has moved on from the things he went through as an 11-year-old child. In 2007, both Carl and David filed a lawsuit against Gerald Brittle, so he's the author of the book The Devil in Connecticut that the movie is based off of, and Brittle wrote this along with Ed and Lorraine Warren. So Carl and David had sued for violation of their privacy, as well as libel and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They claimed that basically Brittle and the Warrens used their family and their story and dramatized everything to make money. Brittle, the author, responded that his book was based on fact and also based on interviews that he did with the Glatzel family for more than 100 hours. Carl claims that the Warrens exploited his family for money, and he told the Associated Press in 2007 that his brother David had suffered from mental illness as a child, a condition he had since recovered from. They never say what mental illness, they never see what he was diagnosed with. They never even say if he was diagnosed. They just said like he would sometimes have delusions and hallucinations, and then he would recover. It was said that some of the profits from this book were going to go towards the family and towards getting Arne out of prison. However, after the republication of the book in 2006 by Universe, the Glatzels sued the authors and book publishers for violating their right to privacy. They went on to say that the whole possession story was a hoax thought up by Ed and Lorraine Warren. They claim that the Warrens told them that this specific story and approach would make them millions, and they'd also be able to get Arne out of prison. However, Arne and Debbie, who are now married, stand by the Warrens and their theory of demonic possession, and that it is 1,000,000% the truth. Debbie and Arne claim that the Glatzels are suing solely for monetary purposes. Carl Glatzel would go on and say, after the passing of their parents, he and his wife were sorting through their belongings. They discovered something they never knew growing up. It was apparent that their mother struggled with OCD. She would meticulously document everything. If it was a piece of paper or on a calendar, she'd write notes. One note caught their attention. It mentioned the family having their medicine and all seemed well. Carl says upon closer inspection, they discovered she had been secretly adding Somanex to their meals for quite some time. Reflecting on the past, he recalled that during dinner, his mother's bowl was always separate. She seemed content, but now it made sense to him. She was controlling the family using Somanex. It induced fatigue, ensuring everyone would rest and avoid problems. Unfortunately, the long-term effects, including mood swings and hallucinations, took a toll on his brother David, who had been unknowingly exposed to it over the years. Arne Cheyenne Johnson was released from prison in 1986. The couple stayed together until 2021 when Debbie passed away. That's the end of our story about the Devil on Trial case. This story truly challenges the boundaries between reality and the supernatural, doesn't it? If you were as captivated and chilled by this journey as we were, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos. We'd love to hear your thoughts, theories, or even personal experiences related to such cases, so please leave a comment below and let's start a discussion. As always, we appreciate your support and your insatiable curiosity. Stay safe.